It's always a pleasure to present here. It's really a group of kind of my peers I see that are here that I get to present to, and so the feedback and the conversations are fantastic. And for those in the audience, I do know quite a few faces, but for those who don't, I thought I'd tell a little anecdote to begin with, something just to get you an idea of kind of who I am and kind of my background and where I come from. I'll get a bit more of a formal introduction in a second, but just to get a feel for who your speaker is today. And to give you a feel for that, there's a concept in my family that I've been made famous for, and it's embarrassingly famous for, to be honest with you. At almost every dinner party and every event it gets brought up, and it's this concept of rational love, okay? Rational love. Now that had to come from me, from someone who seems to want to argue any case whichever way he can. And the worst place you can ever bring up the topic of rational love is with your mother-in-law when you're about to marry her daughter. That's not a good idea, okay? So I don't recommend anyone do this who's about to marry someone, that you engage in a conversation with their mother around this concept of rational love. And the way the discussion was going, I was trying to argue just from my headspace of why can't people love each other rationally? Like, why isn't this a valid concept? Why does everything have to be emotional? She sits firmly in the emotional camp and was arguing for this emotional perspective. And so I was going on, and she was getting angrier and angrier to the point where she just had enough, right? She's had enough. And she's kind of trying to think of the worst thing that she could say to me. And she looks at me and she kind of goes, well, you know, if you love my daughter so rationally, why don't you go marry her in a data center? Because for her, like, getting married in a data center is going to be the worst possible place you could marry someone. Like, it's this cold, sort of unfeeling, unemotional place. And then she said that and she starts walking out of the room, and then it hits her. And she turns back and she says to me, at least if you marry in a data center and your marriage goes wrong, you've got a backup. And walks out and just kind of hits me with it. And from then onwards, I knew I had to marry her daughter, and it was over. So it was someone like that. It obviously won me. But to be honest with you, I am a very, very technical person. And this journey that I've been on, that I'm going to present to you today, has been a very challenging one for a technical person like myself. Like, it's been really challenging. And the reason for that was as a result of the research that me and my co-author Doug Gray did for this, and I'll introduce Doug a little bit later, is that I realized that after 4 technical degrees and 8 years of study that I've done that Kate mentioned, that the reason why data science projects fail as the main cause has nothing to do with technical reasons. It is not due to technical factors. It's not because we don't have a good enough model. That doesn't even feature in the top 10 reasons. It's not why. And so facing this has been a really difficult journey where I guess when me and Doug began the journey, what we were probably hoping to do is to come up with a new technical model that will solve these problems, that's more general and applicable everywhere, because that's the problem. That's what we need, another ChatGPT, but Chat OR or something. And so it was a fascinating journey for us to go on and to realize as 2 very technical individuals that this wasn't the cause. And in particular, what really cemented this that Kate was mentioning was about 3 years ago, I sat down with a friend of mine, and this friend of mine was one of the real leaders, someone I looked up to, a peer of mine in the world of business analytics. They'd built many models throughout their career. They'd been incredibly successful. But what was strange about this meeting was when I met up with this individual, they were 4 months into sick leave because they were suffering from mental health issues. Right? Mental health issues. And I was trying to understand what was going on, and it turns out they'd just come off the back of an absolutely disastrous personalization project. And I want to kind of begin with this story. And this story starts with the idea that this individual worked for a ASX 100 organization, and they, as an organization, had decided that they wanted to get a better bang for their buck. They were spending a lot of money on marketing. They're spending millions of dollars on marketing every year, and they wanted to achieve more for less. And so they came up with the idea of running this personalization campaign. And the idea of the personalization campaign was they'd deliver more targeted marketing that was more meaningful to people than the way they'd just been handing out catalogs and emailing and running TV ads. They wanted to be more specific. And so they should have succeeded. They had everything to succeed. They had the budget. They had the project plans. They drew out the timeline, allocated tasks. They got in a set of consultants to support them. They had the ambition. They were ready to go. Within 2 months of it starting, it was an unmitigated train wreck. The consultants had been fired. The team members had been moved on to other projects. And 2 months after this coffee with this friend of mine, he was fired from his job. This is a C-suite executive at an ASX 100 company. Right? He was out. He was gone. And so I sat there and really was just in a state of shock, talking to him, going like, you are one of the best, right? How could this have happened to you of all people? You've delivered more difficult, you've delivered bigger projects. Why you? And so I went on a bit of a journey trying to look at, okay, how common is this kind of thing? How bad is it? I've been very fortunate that in my career, the projects I've typically led have succeeded in some sense. I haven't had this kind of unmitigated failure. And this kind of journey of researching this led to some pretty shocking and really things that made me question kind of what I was doing and what was going on. And it was really these facts that I'm going to talk about today that kind of led to a deeper realization that there's a big problem here, a really big problem. In fact, the problem was so big that I realized I wasn't going to be able to solve this on my own. I had no chance. And that was kind of where I reached out to a friend of mine, Doug Gray, to see if he could give me a hand. Now, for those of you who don't know who Doug Gray is, he's a good friend of mine over in the States. He's the director of data science at Walmart Global Tech. Each year, using operations research technique, he is responsible for about $350 million of cost avoidance. So absolutely incredible sums. Like these are sums that are more than the revenue most companies make. He saves Walmart that each year. In the 4 years he's been there, he's saved them over $1 billion. He's got $1 billion of validated, scientifically validated savings. This isn't made up hand waving stuff. Each saving that they make, they have to go to the finance department and justify it and demonstrate that it's real. And this is real savings. Over his career, he saved about $4 billion to organizations. So an incredible individual. He's also an adjunct professor at Southern Methodist Uni, and he's won just about every award that exists in the analytics space. So he's really got the credibility. In fact, 2 of them are 2 Informs prizes, which are some of the highest accolades that you can pick up in this space. And so me and Doug started digging into this, and we started trying to understand what was going wrong and what was happening. And as a basis of that, we came up and we published this book, Why Data Science Projects Fail. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share these lessons with you, and I'll skip over this introductions for myself because Kate already did it. And I'm going to share with you some of the main lessons of this book here. I'm going to give you kind of the summary version, but I do recommend you get a copy of the book if you don't. What I'm not going to do is tell you the stories. So a big piece of what me and Doug did was we did a lot of research over about a year between the 2 of us. And then instead of just presenting a research monograph, we wanted to contextualize this for the business community. So for each of the factors that we're going to talk about today, we reached out to our network of peers and other people and brought in their stories and anonymized them, like the one I just told you that is part of the book, part of the strategy chapter, to be able to share those lessons in a more tangible fashion. I think we learn better through stories, and that was really important for us in this book. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little about, are AI projects really that hard? I'm going to tell you the truth that we found. I'm going to talk about analytically mature versus immature. I'm then going to break up the reasons into 4 categories that we've got there, share some deepest insights, and then round up with a really deep statement that when I read it, kind of it really just shocked me. And I'll share that with you, and I think you'll all understand why I'm saying that. So the first thing to answer is, are AI projects really that hard? So to get a basis, to get a foothold on that question, provide it with a basis that gives it some credibility in terms of our answer, we went out and did a lot of research. So first of all, we reviewed meta-analysis that covered about 1,000 different peer-reviewed papers. In particular, me and Doug both being practitioners, it's fine to hear it from the researchers, but we wanted to hear it from the people that are deploying systems to production, so systems that are used in day-to-day operations in businesses. And so we looked at about 100 different blogs of our peers that they'd written online. We took that in as well as a data source. We went and looked at podcasts, or listened to podcasts. We looked at videos on YouTube. We then talked to dozens of AI leaders, and we created this gigantic spreadsheet where we kind of cataloged and gathered all the different reasons for why these different projects fail. Now, I want to tell you what we didn't do. So on the right-hand side of this slide, what we didn't do is focus on what the AI incident database does. So what the AI incident database is, for those of you who don't know, it's a collection of AI stories and AI mishaps that got so bad that they were covered in the news. Things like the Uber autonomous vehicle that hit that cyclist. Things like Microsoft's Tay Twitter bot. Things like that are so egregious and so bad that they get picked up by media outlets, okay? That's not what we're doing. What we're doing is the other half of the iceberg that's underwater. So that's the tip of the iceberg, what you're seeing there. They're the projects that actually managed to get out into real life so that someone could see them. What's happening behind the scenes is what we wanted to dig into that only someone like me and Doug or other practitioners like us could dig into. It's to get behind the scenes and talk to people and go, okay, those projects that didn't even make it as far enough to get to this database, how many of them failed? How many projects fail within organizations before they even see the light of day? How many even get through the gauntlet of AI projects within organizations? That's what we wanted to focus on, and that was where we felt we could add value. So the truth is, when we looked at the data, is we see that about 80+% of all projects fail. Now that's a deliberate sort of round number, okay? Because the numbers vary a lot depending on where you are and what you're doing. And so to one significant figure, it's 80% of analytics, data science, and AI projects fail. Now, the bit about this that's really shocking, that kind of disturbed me and Doug almost more than just the 80% number, is that over the years, we've built a lot of frameworks to help ourselves. So I'm sure you've heard of knowledge-driven discovery, CRISPR-DM, CPM-AI, Microsoft's TPSD, all these different acronyms for how to deliver data science projects. And they've been coming out over the last 20 years. What was a real shock for us is, in spite of these frameworks, all the anecdotal evidence shows that we are not getting better over time. In fact, if the anecdotal evidence shows anything, and this isn't statistically significant, it shows that we're getting worse. We're getting worse. In spite of all these frameworks, we are getting worse, which is damning, right? So what me and Doug wanted to do is, because this 80% is a very broad figure, and we know it doesn't cover anyone. Like me and Doug have never experienced 80% of our projects fail. It just has never happened. I think we've been lucky to work with very good organizations. But we knew that it was going to be a little bit more detailed, and there's going to be some nuances. And so we dug into the data, and we tried to understand this 80% number in more detail. And what we discovered was actually the majority of companies are failing over 90% of the time, the majority, okay? And there's a small minority that are failing about 40% of the time. And we're kind of going, why? Why is that the case? What are they doing differently? What's going on here? And when you see the answer, it's blindingly obvious. It's this distinction between analytically mature versus analytically immature. And the analytically mature organizations are those that you expect to be exactly what they are. They're organizations that have got a strategy around leveraging AI. They've got the right data sets, they've got the right people, they've got the right tools, they've got an analytical culture, they've got a management team that's bought into leveraging AI, they've got the right technologies, they've got all this kind of stuff to make them successful, right? To be successful. And that graph on there kind of shows the failure rates over years by the different types of organizations, and the scale is just nominal, so ignore that. But the immature organization is exactly what you'd expect. And so the big point that we have here is, if you want to double your AI success, you've got to grow up. And the question was, well, how? That's nice to know that it's worth being analytically mature. It's not just people talk about it and sell you these packages to become analytically mature. There's actually a genuine benefit. But the question is now, how do we do it? How do we get there? And so what the next part of the analysis that me and Doug went and did is, we wanted to break up the failure reasons into 4 buckets. And one of the things we didn't want to do in this book was to introduce any new frameworks. We realized that they themselves are a failure. And so we didn't need to bring something new to the picture. So what we did is to categorize these things. We kind of use what's well recognizable, the PPT, people, process, technology, but we added strategy on top of that. The graph on the right, again, it's just nominal scale there. It kind of shows the kind of failure rates. And you can see process is most often followed by strategy. And actually, if you do the numbers, it's then people, then technology last in terms of importance, which was kind of the moment of truth for me and Doug when we're doing this research, going, this will be excellent. We can write a research paper on this new tool that's going to solve all these problems that everyone's missed, all these fools out there that don't know what they're doing. We've got the secret. And it turns out that was never going to happen. It was people stuff that was the big problem. And so what we did is we unpacked each of these. And what I'm going to present to you is a bit of a synopsis of each of them. So in the book, we go into a lot of detail and we talk about it, and we present a lot of stories around this to kind of contextualize these failure reasons and what they mean. But today, I'm just going to give you the high-level kind of summary and show you some stuff that wasn't really part of the book that we included. This is more, you guys are getting a bit of behind-the-scenes look of things that we didn't present in the book itself. So the first one I want to jump into is kind of these strategic causes of failure. And this is really important for those of you who are researchers who, I was talking to Joseph Grotowski, he's the head of the Maths and Physics department at UQ. And I was asking him about, like, I was giving the example of myself where I went to UQ and I did an undergraduate science arts degree. I did a dual degree and I did a double major in maths and the arts degree and a single major in maths and the science degree. And I was kind of talking to him because I built for UQ this maths career sheet. So I spent about 9 months working with the Maths Student Society where we created this sheet where we list out the different careers for mathematicians and we kind of list out the courses that you have to study in UQ to achieve that, all the extracurricular activities to do that, because that was missing when I was a student. It didn't exist. And so I said, I'm going to do this. And so I went and did this at the Maths Student Society. It was a huge amount of work because we wanted to understand why kids study maths, like why bother doing it? And so we wanted to answer those questions with this sheet. We didn't just want to make stuff up. So there's a lot of research, a lot of feedback rounds to improve the design, to make it easily accessible. It took about 9 months of work between me and another person on our weekends. And what was happening in that conversation with Joseph, it was kind of like, okay, how many people that study maths end up being lecturers? And he said, it's about 1%. He said, there just aren't enough academic jobs out there. And he said, I said, okay, are those who do PhDs, how many end up being academic? And he said, oh, I think it's about 10%, 10 to 12% of those at UQ. And so 88% roughly are gonna need to get this right. And they're gonna need to understand, unless you want to stay as a junior data scientist your whole career because you're not getting promoted, you need to know what you need to be successful in your career. And me and Doug being technical, these are things we wish we'd known when we started our career in industry and solving problems. And the most important reason, number one, the most common reason why data science projects fail is that misalignment to strategy. And that's obvious, right? I think everyone in the room will sit there, well, of course, if you don't align with strategy, you're stuffed. But the fact is it's stuffed most often. It's most often not done. The table on the right just gives you a whole bunch of the other reasons, just to give you an idea of the kind of things that were there. But in the book, what we don't want to do is, I think we had over 100 different reasons why projects fail. That wouldn't be helpful to a reader to say, hey, here's 100 different reasons, good luck, see you later. We kind of did a bit of the 80-20 rule. We looked at the most common ones. We cut it off because we were counting them in terms of how often they were referenced. We cut it off and just present kind of the top 20 that cover 80% of the failure rate. And these are kind of the reasons. So the number one reason overall is that failing to build the need in the organization. So lack of alignment strategy and a lack of leadership or upper management buy-in. So upper management's just not bought in. You love it. You're convinced of the value. They don't care. They're not data scientists. These guys are retail experts. They're merchandising kings. They know how to get the best products. They know fashion trends. Forget your mass mumbo jumbo. That won't help me, right? And so they're not bought in. They don't think it's real. And so one of the things that we came up with as we were going along was what you need to do is really find those strategically important projects. And a way to do that, especially if you work for an ASX listed company, is read the annual report. Look at what the CEO and chairman is saying strategically important and try and find a project that aligns with that and for which data science and business analytics can actually help accelerate that strategy. Don't come up with some random stuff that was your PhD topic. I'll be blunt with you, people probably aren't interested in that, right? They're interested in their business right now and improving the bottom line. Align with that, take your skills you did in your PhD and apply them to the business and have a real impact. The more common one, but I start with strategy because it's higher level than process, because if you don't get strategy right, you're stuffed. On the process side of things, it's again another one of these just super obvious reasons. It's almost embarrassing for me to get up here and say this to you because it's said by everyone. Everyone says this, that data is a huge issue in organizations. So either data quality, missing data, data in silos, all these kind of data issues are just so common, it's ridiculous. It's the second most common reason. And then after that, it's not setting clear or reasonable expectations. We have a massive challenge ahead of us. All of us here at Optima, all of us here doing business analytics and AI, in that the hype cycle is killing us. It is killing us. The number of executives and boards I walk into that have this expectation that I can wave a magic AI wand and all their AI systems are built overnight on their rubbish data on sheets of paper is just insane, right? There's this complete misalignment of expectation and the effort involved and the level of it's almost science. It is a science doing these projects. There's a hypothesis. You have to build a model. There's no guarantee the data's good enough. There's no guarantee people will adopt the systems. It's this real science, hypothesis-driven science approach to doing data science. And this lack of appropriate expectations is just making our life harder. And so what we kind of say here, and again, I don't provide it in these sort of pithy versions in the book. And if anyone wants a copy of this deck, just Kate or anyone, happy to send it out. This is not something that's some confidential secret of mine at all. You can buy a copy of the book and you'll see it all, except this kind of stuff. I don't care if you see it. We don't present that in the book. This is more just for the presentation to give you a feel for kind of a lot of the reasons. But if you don't have the right data to solve the problem, then don't expect any miracles if the data's no good, because the expectations are going to be misaligned and you're in real trouble. On the people side of things, again, it almost pains me to get up here and to kind of keep going through these things, as I feel like I'm teaching you all the basics that you all already know, or talking to it. But it really is the truth. It's still the case that the third most common reason for why data science projects fail is the lack of the right resources. That's the third most common reason, is you don't have the right skilled people. And it can be as simple as you go to an organization and you've worked with Kate on all these incredible optimization algorithms. You can solve any network flow problem that someone throws at you. You're an expert at MIPS. And then they walk in the door and they say, hey, I've got this time series forecasting problem. You're the analyst, solve it. You go, I've never done that before. No, you're the analyst. You're the data scientist. I want you to forecast stuff. Isn't that what you do? Or vice versa, you've done a statistics degree and you walk in the door and they say, hey, we need to optimize our supply chains. And you look at them and they go, but you're the AI guy. Just optimize the supply chain. And no, seriously, there's this real gap in understanding. And it's not necessarily a thing to criticize anyone or throw shade on. It's a reality. This person's not an expert in your area, right? And they're kind of looking at you as the expert. And they're getting sold this hype from vendors and everyone else. It's making them think, well, AI is AI, right? Whereas if you walked into that merch manager and you said to them, well, just give the customer Nike. I don't care if they want Adidas. Isn't it the same thing? Right? It's that kind of thing. And unless you're an expert in it, you just don't understand. And so the other major reason that we see on the people side of things is really a poor analytics culture in a company. I'm sure you've heard this kind of concept of the HIPPO, the highest paid person's opinion. That's the decision-making protocol. That still exists. Or it could just be there's politics, or it could just be whatever exists in there. And it doesn't matter what data you present, they've already made up their mind and they're going to do it the way they think's right. And so that's kind of a real challenge within an organization. And kind of what we say there is if you don't have the right people, or people disapprove an analytics project, then that's just a red flag. You shouldn't even try. Like you're setting yourself up for failure. And again, you're all my colleagues and peers and people that either I've been in your shoes or I work with. And so the worst thing I want to see for us is we sit in this job with one failed project after another, where people telling us that AI doesn't work and operations research is a hoax. We don't need to hear that, right? We need to get ourselves in places and aligned with organizations that can help us deliver outcomes that lead to value. Now, the final reason, which was kind of me and Doug's sort of big hope when we started this journey, that this would be number one, and it didn't even get in the top 10. So that number one reason up the top 10 wasn't even in the top 10. But it's even the number one reason in the technology causes of failure had nothing even to do with the model. It had to do with not even having the right tools. And again, if we come back to our poor operations research or optimization expert who's in an organization that's just bought Garobi and then told to do time series forecasting, they're in trouble, right? They don't have the right tool for the right job. Or they're given this big data set and they're handed to on an Excel sheet, they're in trouble again. They need some cloud tools and some real databases to go beyond just the Excel sheet. And this is kind of a major problem where people lack high quality data and tool infrastructure. But then we come to kind of the reason why a lot of research tends to exist and a lot of the research that's going around is building out those new models, that Bender's decomposition, that column generation, those kind of things in the optimization space, the simplex algorithm that help us solve these problems that we couldn't solve with the previous technologies. And so what we've got here is kind of the admonition that you need to invest in the right types of tools to solve the problems that are known to have solutions that you can implement. And so this is kind of a key piece there. We kind of try and, I'm summarizing this presentation. You don't get this in the actual book in this kind of short, pithy version. I'm kind of just summarizing for you guys. But this is really where we kind of come to in the book. And on this journey, one of the things that we look at as well that's important for me and Doug, because we have been very, very fortunate to work with analytically mature organizations, is that kind of what do they do wrong? So now you've taken the lessons to heart that I've said. You've built out an excellent team and you're part of a great organization that's very successful. And what you want to do is you want to stop that 40% of failures. You want to reduce that even further. You want to be the absolute pinnacle of success. You want to be number one in your field. And the question is, what do you need to look out for? And there's kind of a few things that we talk about, and I've just picked up 3 here just for this presentation. And so the first one is this ML ops. So ML ops is another one of these catchy terms. You kind of see it everywhere nowadays. Everything ops. There's HR ops, and everything gets rebranded now to make it kind of a justification for maybe a pay raise or something. I don't know why. But it's ML ops. It's this kind of management of your data science pipeline after you've deployed the model to production. And it's really looking at things that the data that's coming in, is it the same as the data we trained it on? Is the model still performing at the same level it started on? That's data and model drift. And then when we roll it out, did we just roll it out haphazardly, or did we do an A/B test to make sure the thing actually works? And stuff like that's really important on the production side when you get out there. Another big thing that you'll see if you've worked in a lot of projects like I have, sometimes things are just out of your control. And that's this kind of fate outside influences. And I've got a really fascinating project where I work with one of Australia's retailers, and we deployed Australia's first ever pricing algorithms for a commodity that's available to everyone. And it's a commodity that gets advertised on the street, right? I won't go into too much more detail, but it was the first time ever in Australia that we deployed this algorithm. And along the journey of us doing this, we had this incredible stakeholder. This guy's a legend, and I'm still close to him since then. And he was a big champion of the project, and he understood the value of analytics. And you need these people. Halfway through the project, he left. He got a better job offer. He disappeared. I couldn't control that. I mean, I could build the best model, set up the best data pipeline, make sure I got the people, process, technologies, make sure we're aligned with strategy, do everything. He left. I was like, now my champion, my stakeholder's gone. What do I do? Fortunately, this is an analytically mature organization, but in other organizations, that can be the death of the project. Your champion's gone, it's over. There's nothing more you can do. Budgets are gone, no one's gonna fight for you. Your project is dead halfway through. And that's, whether you're analytically mature or not, that can be very difficult. And then complacency. So you do see with big companies that are very successful that don't maintain a high level of discipline. And that's a really difficult thing to do. I'm not someone that's good at that myself. I'm quite poor at it. Is that you get complacent, like you stop doing the checklist, you stop following best practices, and you just kind of do, yeah, I know how to do this rubbish, I just do it, whatever. And that's a problem. And a big question we try and answer in the book too is, does a 0% failure rate make sense? Like, should we get there? Is it desirable? Is it a target that we should aim for? And I kind of unpack that a lot in the book. And I'm going to leave that as a bit of a cliffhanger and encourage you to read the book and find out my answer to that question, because it's a very interesting one. It's kind of in the analytically mature chapter. And we unpack it. It's got some really important conclusions that I'll leave for you to discover when you read the book. But one of the other things that we wanted to look at, so moving on from analytically mature and analytically immature, is we also wanted to understand, why is this so hard? Like, why do we have such a high failure rate? Like, why shouldn't it be 10%? Like, theoretically, there's no reason in my mind why it should be so high. What is going on? And so we wanted to understand that a little bit. And so we looked into it, and kind of one of the main reasons that we could understand was AI projects, data science and business analytics projects, ones that move to production, are hard, they're complex. And when I say complex, I mean the technical definition of complex, not the generic. I mean something like the Cynefin framework definition of complex, where you've got simple, complicated, complex, and chaotic. It sits in that complex bucket. And not only is it complex, like IT projects often are, it adds an extra 3 elements to IT projects. The first of which is typically advanced maths. So I know for data science, you don't always have to have advanced maths. If you're building a forecasting model, you can grab a regression and you can grab an ARIMA or an ETS model, and out of the box, you can plug in your data and it'll do the work for you. You can do that. Optimization, you can't. You do need to formulate your objective, your constraints, and your decision variables. You have to do that. You're not going to get around that. So you can't do that. So you typically have some form of advanced maths. You also have significant change management. Now, IT projects have change management. There's no question. AI projects have much bigger, often 10 times the change management, because it's going to fully transform the way some people do their jobs, potentially making some people redundant. Potentially, not always. It's not common. I don't see AI projects and AI tools making people redundant. In fact, all the companies like Klarna in Sweden, where I was for 6 years, that fired its call center team, has now come back through the door with its tail between its legs saying, oh, we screwed up, we're sorry, we're hiring our call center team again, because they got they just got ahead of themselves looking at ChatGPT, thinking it could do more than it could, and really stuffed it up. And the big thing, Bart, that we see, that the huge problem is, and why we even published this book, is this unreasonable expectations. So with the launch of ChatGPT in November 2022, and it being the fastest growing app ever, I think it was it 1 million users in 5 days and 100 million in 3 months, something like that. It said about it and brought this kind of hype that's really causing, and this is kind of hilarious that I would say this, it's causing almost a bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect. And I love using that because I'm not an expert at Dunning-Kruger, which kind of creates a bit of a bit of a hilarious use case because I'm not an expert in it, but it creates this Dunning-Kruger effect where someone saw something on LinkedIn, so now I know AI, I know Gen AI, I know what it can do. I read this article on LinkedIn, I'm an expert now. And it's really not the case. And so we're fighting against these unreasonable expectations caused by this hype. And if you're to blame people like OpenAI, you can't really, because OpenAI goes out there and makes these statements about how, in 2 years' time, we're going to have artificial general intelligence. If you ask me, it's absolute rubbish. We're not. It's just such nonsense. It's incredible. We're going to be replacing all these jobs that aren't going to exist anymore. Again, I think that's nonsense. I see it again practically. That's just not true. But the reason why someone like Sam Altman does that is to pump up his valuation. And it works incredibly well. Good on him. He did a great job. He's pumped up his valuation of his company massively. People like the ex-CTO and those other people that have gone out and created, and co-founders of OpenAI, they've gone out and created companies that have no product that are worth 20 billion. Excellent. They're doing an excellent job of boosting their valuations. But they're creating hell for us who've actually got to deploy and build these tools. And so one of the things that we look at when we see this failure rate is it reminded me of startups. Like if you think of the statistics on startups, everyone says like 90% of startups fail within X number of years, whatever it is, 5, 10 years, they're gone. And if you look at the reasons again why they fail, they're not technical reasons, right? There's no market need, i.e. the product didn't align with the customer-based strategy, let's call it. That's no product, there's no market need. Your strategy's wrong, right? You got the strategy wrong. You ran out of cash, so the budget wasn't there. You were building the wrong thing. You didn't have the right team, so the people, competition, these other factors, they're not, in the reasons when you look why startups fail, it's not because they weren't technically good enough. It's not because they didn't have a good enough model. It's just not the case. And me and Doug are very passionate about this because if you look at what's going on, there's some really scary numbers coming ahead of us very quickly. So back in 2021, it was Statista brought out some statistics, and I know this is really old, but I don't have access to the latest numbers. And the latest numbers be fascinating because this is before ChatGPT. They said the artificial intelligence industry is about $100 billion. By 2030, it's going to get to $2 trillion. Right? And that was before ChatGPT came out. And if we're saying that 80% of projects are going to fail, we just burnt over $1 trillion US of money. What could we do with that cash? Like what could we should all have an incredible mission and a fire underneath us to save that money. It's 1.6 trillion. The Australia's GDP is 1.6 trillion. The entire Australian GDP will get burnt up to stuff that didn't have any impact and failed, right? That's a terrible outcome. But most importantly for me, most selfishly for me, is by doing so, this will take down with it, in my eyes, one of our most important ways of making decisions, i.e. data-driven. It will destroy trust in what we do, what we get trained for. It will absolutely obliterate trust because most people out there aren't data scientists. Most people out there are the people giving us orders in terms of what to do in industry and how they want to see us use our tools. That's what they are, because people like Aldi, people like Woolworths and Coles can exist perfectly fine without an optimization or a data science algorithm at all. They did in the past. They existed fine without. They can operate. They'll be less efficient. Their profit margins may be lower. They may not have such a great selection, but they can still operate. They will still exist. And it's like that for most organizations out on the planet. They will still exist without any models. But if they lose faith and trust in what we do, that will be devastating for us, not only from an industry, but also from a research perspective. It will hurt us in every way, shape, and form. Now, one of the things that we see from this that I touch on here and why I like coming to the universities to present, and the University of Melbourne's an excellent university in this case, that they're tackling these kind of things head on, is that me and Doug in the People chapter went and reviewed the top 40 data science courses in the USA, right? And we reviewed Stanford's as one of them, and this is literally their program. These courses are the one they teach. And what you notice that the absolute strong focus, there's 99% of courses are this in the US, it's all on technical capabilities. It's all about learning the technical stuff. Now, don't get me wrong. To be a data scientist, if you can't do data science, well, you're not a data scientist, okay? You're not. You need to do the data science at some point. You need to learn the maths. But what's causing these data science when they get into industry to fail is never their technical things, it's the people skills. The people skills fall apart. It's where it falls down there. Their projects will fail, not because they're not technically capable, but because they didn't set the right expectations, but because they didn't raise red flags. This project isn't aligned with the strategy. That they didn't say, hey, our data's rubbish, but they just tried to build a better and better model to address a problem that's fundamentally unfixable. They didn't go through that. And this is kind of what me and Doug are proposing and suggesting is that we need more of the people stuff in the courses for data science. Simple things like project management, stakeholder management, communication, these kind of bits and pieces that are actually sometimes more important than the model itself. In the course I teach at UQ, BSAN 4201, which is a fourth-year business analytics course, I've got a full lecture dedicated to communicating results, because the reality is once you build your model, if no one understands it so that no one can use it, what value does it create? None. And so it shows just this communication piece, this little thing that sits on top, how important that is for the success of these models. And I want to wrap up with this really, really fascinating quote. And this is what shocked me. Like, this was really shocking when I read this quote. This is what I said at the start. And it was one made by Dale Carnegie. Now, Dale Carnegie's book seems to split audiences in two. Okay? It seems to split people in two. And I believe that the split happens with those who've read the book and those who haven't read the book. And I think those who haven't read the book scream that this is evil, it's about manipulating people, it's about influencing, it's all this evil stuff. How could you read the book? Good on you. Well done judging a book by its cover. And then there's the other group of people who've read the book, like me, and go, this is actually a really good book. And given this is a recording, I'll use a different phrase for it, but it's don't be an a-hole. Is kind of his main message. It's really just don't be an a-hole. And his second most important message is have some empathy. Try and put yourself in the shoes of the person you're talking to, and it will help you and go a long way. But what was most important in this book was a quote he had from 100 years ago. You need to know this book was published in the 1920s. And I'm going to read out this quote because it's really quite like it shakes me to the core almost to read this. He's saying it's 100 years ago. And what he says here is investigation and research done by the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching in technical lines as engineering show that about 15% of one's financial success is due to one's technical knowledge, and about 85% is due to skill in human engineering, to personality and the ability to lead people. Dale Carnegie said this 100 years ago, and we're saying it again 100 years later. Thank you very much.